only seconds ago braced yourself mentally that, you're about to die. You've accepted that.
Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
The single greatest sacrifice I've made is my family.
There were a couple of public beheadings.
In order to kill, you've got to be a little bit angry. Not psychotic, but just angry.
We could look down Frankfurt and see it on fire.
Stuff blowing up everywhere.
There will be no surrender.
And then they had to fight an enemy in amongst women and children in those buildings.
I could never not go back. They were my friends and they felt like family.
She did say, "You've changed."
A soldier put everything on the line to help one of our blokes.
H is a former senior Special Forces soldier with a protected identity. This is the second part of my conversation with the 2nd Commando Regiment veteran. Make sure you've already listened to Volume 1 before continuing with this episode. H's story picks up with his first deployment to the Middle East, 2006, Afghanistan. So H, you've had a decade and a half in the military by this point. Your Special Forces, you have been training to be creme de la creme at absolute peak for years. You've proven yourself in overseas theatres such as Timor, and you've proven yourself at home in things like the Commonwealth Games. And after, as we discussed before, back in your classroom, hiding under the desk using your ruler and playing soldier on that playground, you can now go overseas and play in the ultimate playground of the Middle East. Do you remember when you first landed in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I do, quite clearly. And you've given an excellent lead in there, Alex. I was, I'm not going to hide it, I was very excited. You wouldn't have seen that by my body language, but I was nothing short of very excited for every reason that you've just mentioned. We knew this was it, as in this was going to be big, and this was going to be combat in the true sense of every word, and special operations, importantly, in the true sense of every word. And those earlier trips very much led into a faster maturity of the unit's skills, knowledge and attitude, and it accelerated everything in development of equipment, in development of our tactics, techniques and procedures. I was very excited, mate. It's the short answer.
I'm sure. Now, I'll just flag for listeners before we continue that for a mix of operational, security and diplomatic reasons, we'll acknowledge sort of roughly your timeline of events, but we're not going to get always into operational specifics or mission objectives. We're going to more focus on your experiences on the ground because of this high-profile environment you're working in. So let's start with some of your early experiences in 2006 in Afghanistan. We talked about some of those first skirmishes in Somalia and some of those first very slow sneaking up patrols in Timor. Can we talk about some of your first more full-on contacts with the commandos?
I'll skip through the first bit a little bit, not to take anything away with it. The way it all ended up falling out was myself and the then platoon commander of the commandos. We essentially, in the first few weeks, after only a couple of patrols, where there were no real significant events or nothing I'd consider significant now, were basically our actions and timeline after a particular event was questioned in a formal way by the Force Element Commander, who was a major from SASR. The result of this had me reassigned, initially not in a good light, and basically that commander didn't believe what myself and the commando commander, which I refer to as JT, he didn't believe our story. Essentially, there was a big gap in the timeline because a few things happened when we were outside the wire, all of which we explained. And categorically, what we explained was 100% correct and right and factual. He didn't believe that. So to skip forward from there, that had me sent down to a Special Operations Element Command in Kandahar, where I was basically awaiting further orders or assignment from the commander, who was Mark Smethurst. And they were at that stage based in Bagram. So to move forward now to your question, after being there a short amount of time, I was directed to come to Bagram and be reassigned. And I was extremely frustrated at the time, but I had a lot of trust in Mark Smethurst, and they told me not to worry. They had a very good assignment for me. So I flew down to Bagram, and upon arriving at Bagram, I was told that I was going to be put inside what's called, or has numerous names, but some of them are OCF, being other coalition forces, SMU, Special Mission Unit, the Task Force, as it's referred to. And what those terms encapsulate is, at that time in that theatre, as they did in Iraq, the JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command of the US, which handles all of the US Tier 1 and some Tier 2 assets, which is basically the best of their best. Listeners may have heard of units called Delta Force or CAG or SEAL Team 6, also referred to as Dev Group. All of that information is open source. And they form very, very strategic task forces and are sent into numerous theatres, normally with a very specific objective. So the task force's objective in Afghanistan was the hunt for Osama bin Laden. So to be the first person to go into that task force as an operator from either unit, in Afghanistan that is, was very, very exciting.
So you've gone from almost being punished from this other event to almost having this honour, this accolade.
Yeah, because there was a big disconnect in between the command at Tarin Kowt and the higher command at Bagram, and those decisions at Tarin Kowt were made unbeknown to the higher command at Bagram. Otherwise, those decisions wouldn't have been allowed to be made. That's the short of it. I've gone from, you need to move you out of here because you've got integrity issues, like I said, which categorically was incorrect, to getting this assignment. That's why I was given this assignment, because they knew there were no issues.
All right, H, so tell me about some of these missions with the SMU.
I guess there's a period of, settling in, no doubt judgment, and for a few other reasons. I was first assigned with the Ranger element that resides within that task force. After a couple of operations with the Ranger Force element, who I hadn't worked with much before prior to this, only on, where they had come across the unit on short exchanges or whatnot, which you don't really get a good grasp of. You get a bit of an indication. But in short, this changed my opinion of them dramatically. Yes, they still have, more of a, younger operator in there, but as a group, maybe not so much as some of the young individuals, but as a group assigned to the mission that they were assigned, they were a highly professional outfit, and it was good to work with them. And probably the biggest thing, once I stepped foot in the task force, biggest realisation with the difference is on the levels that you're working at, was they had everything, as in asset-wise and resources, like directly force assigned to them. So where the Australian Special Operations Task Group, based out of Tarin Kowt, we would, with most assets and most resources, for the majority of the entire conflict we were there, we would have to bid, scramble, negotiate, whatever terms you want to use, to get those assets and resources to support, the various missions and profiles that we wanted to go on. So that was the first biggest thing I noticed, that, you really were at the top of the food chain in regards to the operational level that you were working at. Basically, I hit the ground running. So I think it was the first or second mission we went out on. There was a, as is referred to, a HVI or HVT, high-value individual, high-value target, who was Mr. Baroud-Nakhani, had popped above the, as we call it, the ISR threshold, the Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance threshold, which basically encapsulates all the things that these units and as a military that we use to gain information. So without going into the detail of all them or breaching any current capabilities or operational security, I'll just use that word, ISR. So he hadn't been heard of, as in at all, for a good few years, and had been residing in Pakistan. One of the first and certainly most exciting missions at that time for me to go on was this mission. And even for the task force, it put it under a lot of stress, because there were some real complexities with this mission. So it was identified where Baroud-Nakhani was going, or was likely to be, through, as I've described, the ISR. And this was at about 12,500 feet, just inside, as in a couple of kilometres inside Afghanistan, up in the mountains. So this presented a lot of problems in regards to the aircraft limits. What you can and cannot carry on an aircraft at height, reduces, or that aircraft's ability to land at height, more accurately, severely reduces in regards to the weight. I was put inside the ranges, is broken up into a couple of different elements, but there's essentially like a recon element within them. And I flew into the location with them on the MH-47s, which is the Special Operations dedicated 160th Chinooks. which can carry an enormous payload. To give you an idea, we could only put, there's about 6 to 8 of us in the back of it. And we had to land in this, quite steep, re-entrant ravine type area where the blades are only a couple of feet once we came in to land off the ground, and it really limited the aircraft's power. So anyway, we come into land, and there was one Chinook had landed before us. So there was 6 to 8 guys on the ground, and then we were coming in, and that first Chinook was going back to pick some more guys up, and you can see we're in sort of a wheel like that to get people on the ground. The problem that quickly unravelled was when we landed, the first group was already in contact, and they were being heavily engaged. So as we landed, we were being engaged. And what had happened that we found out in the debrief afterwards, because we were going to be on the ground, well, it was planned, you never really know what's going to happen, but we'd be on the ground a few hours. And this turned into a 36-hour ordeal.
So how many of you are there in total? 6 to 8 in the back of one Chinook. How many Chinooks were landing with guys coming out?
We could only land one at a time, and I was in the second one in. So now there's 12, 15, 16 of us or something on the ground. And we managed to land at least one other. To be honest, I can't fully recall, but at the most 2 others. So there was only, at any stage, maybe 20 odd of us on the ground. In short, we faced a phenomenal force, as in hundreds, as in low hundreds was the estimation. And there was, close to 100 odd killed because we flew back in there a few days later. I didn't, but others did, to do what they call BDA, the damage assessment. So what happened was, where we thought was a few from the ISR, so the numerous assets scanning the ground, what they thought was a couple of guys standing around like a fireplace turned out to be a huge cave complex. And you might think, well, how would this happen? Because of the altitude and the angles of, mountainside, the re-entrance and etc., it was really hard. They couldn't basically look in. They could only more or less look down, if that makes sense. Once we landed, obviously they heard us land. There's a couple that were standing around the fireplace were obviously sentries at the front of the cave complex, and they alerted the 100-odd fighters that were inside this cave complex of what was taking place outside, and they obviously came streaming out. So it was a real baptism of fire. Certainly, like I said, we're in the thick of it right from landing, and this continued on for almost a day, and it was extremely difficult fighting because of the altitude. So when I got off the helicopter, you normally run out the back to the slight left or slight right. After, sort of moving off briskly, because the adrenaline's going, I actually thought I might have been shot or something. I just knew there was something wrong with me. I didn't know what. And then I quickly realised it was the altitude. I couldn't breathe effectively to maintain enough oxygen to keep going at a, aerobic/anaerobic capacity. So we're in this firefight trying to move to cover, and we could only do that in these sort of limited bounds. 1, because of the terrain, 2, because of fire, and 3, because of the altitude. You just couldn't run off to wherever you wanted to go. So I actually remember taking a knee and sort of laughing, having a chuckle to myself, like how crazy everything that was happening actually was.
I think having a giggle in sort of that one of those first real high pressure, high stakes combat scenarios is actually quite common.
Well, I mean, most of us, you've got to maintain that sense of humour, I guess.
And it's a bit of a stress release.
And sometimes it might be a nervous giggle. But, it's a definite trait within most special operators that I've come across. You have to have that sense of humour, because otherwise, what do you have? You can't take a knee and sit there and cry. Not that ever entered my mind, but, like, what else do you do? So you sort of kind of have a laugh at the situation and quickly reassess, get your situational awareness, aligned, and make that next decision. And that was, to keep bounding, towards where the other guys were already in heavy contact, but also, you're thinking, what are we going to do once we get there?
Before we get there, can we drill down on the tactile experience of being in a heavy contact like that, bullets whizzing past your head, the absolute pump of adrenaline, the sights, the sounds, and the fear?
It's a surreal experience. In part, some things are going in slow motion, other parts are going in fast forward, then some moments seem to freeze in time. So it's quite surreal. You're in your first sort of actual proper all-out firefight, as that was, or contact, whatever you wish to call it. Basically spent the next few hours trying to manoeuvre, keep some security there for that, because we could hear over the radio, well, they knew straight away we were in trouble. And because of the ISR assets, there's surveillance, could see the sheer numbers coming out. And all, so you can imagine back in the command centre, all this is getting spun up quite quickly, because this is how you lose 15 or 20 guys, and it becomes one of those books that someone survives and writes about. We had to react quickly on the ground, and they also had to react very quickly back there to get more guys on the ground, but also calculating the risk, because this is when you lose a whole helicopter full of guys. the fight was intense and we just kept trying to hold our ground. And I can't remember what stage it was, but when that other helicopter came in, I remember hearing it, not really looking around much, but just knowing that they were coming in, it was a bit of a relief that you knew you were getting more boots on the ground. It just sort of escalated from there till it got to a point where we were all in relatively good positions, or as good as we could be, and just holding our line as they kept trying to attack us. But we didn't have the numbers really to go forward, so we were in more of a defensive posture, I guess you could say. And then became immediately and heavily dependent upon, the JTACs, the air controllers, to bring us in assets to, regain the initiative. So, when the Apaches started coming in, when other jets dropping bombs started to come in to help us out and to obviously give us that upper hand. I mean, we'd already had those 2 guys that had already been shot, neither of which were, died of wounds or anything, but we had them on the ground as well. Yeah, so the situation was very serious, very, very serious.
And how does the battle end?
We landed sometime in between midnight and 0400. I can't remember the exact time. So within a good few hours, the sun come up, and then it sort of went on through the next day with numerous, different jets and helicopters, coming in with their firepower to help us out. And then I remember it was late that afternoon into the early evening, they actually got us to pull back a certain distance. By then I'd moved up onto some high ground. I was about 500 to 600 metres away with 3 other guys on a really, really sharp, like a knife-like ridgeline, to the extent that on a couple of occasions I had the strop on, which is the strap that's around your waist that you use to hook onto the bottom of the aircraft so you don't fly around in the event of something happening with the helicopter. And I remember trying to wrap that around. There's 1 or 2 small trees there and rocky outcrops, just trying to hold myself onto this edge. And we were up there providing, none of us had a sniper rifle, but you'd say we were providing more sort of longer range surgical fire, or whatever word you want to use, down on that position. And we got ourselves into that position because we had a distinct different angle. But then, once they sort of had an idea of where that was coming from, we had a lot of machine gun fire and etc. directed towards us. But how it all ended up finishing, we had some bombers which were flown all the way from Diego Garcia, and they came in and dropped 14 2,000-pounders on and around that cave entrance. They were dropped in two lots of 7, so had 14,000 pounds of explosives going off on each run. Yeah, I can't describe that. When we knew it was coming in, one of the guys looked across me. He said, "Get down and hold your mouth open. They're a couple of minutes out." So because of the concussion effect, you want your mouth open. Well, that's what I was advised to do, and I'd never experienced or been that close to that type of thing before. But yeah, when they went off, there was a sense of relief. Because you're so close, though, there's a little bit of concern as to, you sure they know where we are? Like, are we going to get 2,000 pounds dropped on us here? It all went off relatively seamlessly, I guess you could say. That then gave us the initiative to, well, one, there was no more activity there, but the decision was made then to get us out of the area because there was a lull. So while we can, and noting that we had those couple of casualties that have been there now for a good duration of time, the commander made the decision, which I think was definitely the right decision, to get us out, and then we'll reassess what we've achieved and what we haven't achieved through all the surveillance assets, by observing that area, etc., over the next 24, 48 hours. After that all went off, we withdrew back down the edge of the mountain to where they designated the Chinooks were going to come in and pick us up. So we got down there. Obviously, the casualties went out in the first couple of lifts, and then we got ourselves out. That was sort of the end of that.
Did you find out what happened to Mr. Haqqani?
Irony is he got away. It was a few years later, a good few years later, the task force killed him, confirmed a few years later in another operation, because I was particularly tracking that individual because I thought I missed a pretty good opportunity. Because he was a very, very high profile and he was right up in their food chain. So it was important that he was killed or captured, as soon as possible.
Just jump back to when you described the fact you're on the high ground, you've strapped yourself in and are providing that surgical fire. So we talked about in Timor that you need to be operating that top 1%. All those 1% add up. They matter all the time. You always have to be fulfilling that. Then put yourself in a high-pressure scenario like this. You've been fighting for hours and hours and hours, and you've got so many more hours ahead of you. How do you keep performing at that same peak capacity over such a sustained, draining period of time?
At the time, you're not thinking about it a lot. I always used to say it's about the man to my left and the man to my right. Because if everybody has that mindset, then the man to your left and the man to your right, noting that you're to the left or right of someone, has such a higher chance of getting home. So right then and there on the ground, you're not thinking about it so much. But in further answer to your question, that's one of the principles where we, through the selection process, what we're looking for in an individual when you go into the psychology of why guys, as in normal soldiers, are deemed suitable for special operations through that selection process. And that's where the psychology comes into play. You've got to remain focused. You've got to be unwavering, and you've got to have that level of resolve and discipline that no matter what's happening around you, what's the mission and what's the best thing to do next to achieve that mission, and along with that, I'm looking after and making sure that everyone gets home, which sometimes they don't. But when you look at everything that we do and the amount of risk associated with it, generally speaking, we get everyone home.
I think then that's probably going to be the answer to my next question, but given this is your first real heavy firefight and the first time you're actively working over a sustained period to be firing at the enemy, you're working to take life, is that aspect of it almost just an unremarkable event for you? It's just part of the gig.
Again, you're right. At that time, you don't think about it a lot. You're training, and I know I've said this earlier, and I don't want to keep repeating it, but and I know a lot of other people have said it, but it is dead right. If you've had really high-quality training, as we had, that training kicks in, and that's why we train at the level that we train it at. We train at such a high level, and we do things, so repetitively, and we put ourselves under enormous duress during, lots of training iterations, so that when it comes to the real thing, you aren't balking, you aren't thinking too much. You're still thinking, but your actions are a lot more refined and honed, that at the time you're doing what needs to be done, and 99% of the time you're making the right decision. It is extremely complex, and it is extremely, mentally demanding, and takes a very, very high level of honed skills to be able to do that. There's a lot going on, but you can't let anything of your personal concern at that time or emotion, be something that starts to steer or impact on others around you. You need to be, that rock, because we all feed off each other to a certain extent, in a good way, I mean. So, everyone needs to be, confident and assured of their ability and assured of the ability of the men to your left and right. That's what lets us do what we do.
What did you make of the enemy you were fighting over in Afghanistan, the Taliban as warriors or fighters?
A very diverse opinion, I guess, because fortunately or unfortunately, I got to fight and encounter the highest tier, right into, higher echelons in Al-Qaeda leadership, and they have a significant protective group normally assigned to them, well versed at fighting and a lot better trained and equipped, through to the borderline derogatory term, the thugs in thongs, being the lower echelon fighters, sort of out in more regional areas, who, just trying to influence something regionally and normally only for self-gain, and a borderline criminal activity than sort of terrorist activity. So over the years, I would say individuals that were extremely professional and very competent, through to people who were quite unprofessional and not competent fighters. I always had respect for them. And I think anybody who didn't is foolish. They can be quite strong, hardy. I've seen people in extreme cold weather, with, their feet frozen, fighting, living out in the most inhospitable conditions, the most diverse terrain you can imagine, with poor weapons, poor equipment, a very, very poor diet, and they're fighting hard. So their will to fight, or some of them, their will to fight, and their resolve was quite high. And, with those encounters, you developed a respect when you see guys shot several times or wounded significantly, living and fighting under those conditions, with the poor equipment that are stated, and they will go on and will push through everything where we would throw at them. I developed a respect for them and saw some unbelievable acts of mental toughness. You'd have to say courage as well.
H, I'm sure there are very many, but are there any other particular standout memories or exciting incidents from that first deployment to Afghanistan? Yeah,
you're right. There was almost probably too many. There was a operation where I was in a helicopter that got shot down. So what happened after that operation is we went back, we did a few others. You'd almost go out every night and do these style of things. So where I thought this is a one-off, they become very routine. After a couple of other operations, some elements, key people inside the task force pulled me aside and wanted me to go across to the Tier 1 element and work with them. And at the time, that was primarily filled with dev group operators, being SEAL Team 6 from one of their squadrons. So I went across and started doing some things with them, and fast forwarding then to a particular operation. One element did a infill to a target area near the Pakistan border, where we flew out of Kandahar, which was, again, we thought we had everything relatively covered, as in there was nothing particularly alarming about it. It was a fairly well enemy-held territory. One element went in a foot fill, so they did like an offset, as they call it, where we'd land away from the target and move towards the target on foot, and then another element would come and land. When we say on the target, basically as close to the target as possible. So there's a combination of that, and also some other people getting landed in cordon positions or put on key pieces of terrain, so that if counterattack came into that objective area, they would be in between us and them, so we could focus on what we were doing, and they would focus on whatever was coming in trying to attack us. Everything on that target went reasonably well, as in we killed the persons that were identified to be there, and it was what you would call in these high-end operations reasonably uneventful. Having said that, there was a lot going on, but in comparison. And then towards the end, we got a couple of cordon forces, got in some pretty intense firefights, engagements, but managed to hold their position and kill those enemy. So we decided it was time to extract, at what stage 2 Chinooks came and landed, again, pretty well on the target, as in 100 metres or so away. And they were side by side and slightly offset. So one was, like about 100 feet forward of the other, if that makes sense. And as they're looking forward, I was getting on the far left one. And for no particular reason, I was the last person to get on. As I was running over towards it, just in those last seconds, almost like a cartoon character, sort of my heels skidded into the dirt, because this enormous amount of trace from some heavy machine guns started coming over the top of the helicopter from 2 distinct different angles. So we're basically fixed in an arc, and it was coming over our Chinook. And at that time, the loadmaster, because he's just on the back ramp there, couldn't really see what was going on. So I'd sort of grabbed his shoulder, and just as I did that, he must have been getting it over his radio, because I was trying to grab him to pull him around to see what was going on, because you can't hear much then, because the noise of the jets out of the Chinooks. So anyway, then I jumped on board and found out later, because we sat there hovering for a period of time. It seemed like forever. It may have been 30 seconds or a minute, whereas normally you'd take straight off. And what they were doing was they're trying to coordinate the other assets that were above us to quell where that fire was going. And there was also some confusion as to why that fire happened, as in, we had a gunship above us and some other assets. And in the debrief, and the debrief was quite extensive, because this turned into a $40 or $60 million operation. What we found out in the debrief is when they did a handover, it's basically who was controlling those assets, and something happened. I can't remember the details, and it kind of doesn't matter now. But something happened with the handover where there was a 30-second or a minute delay in observation or coordination or communication, or a combination of all the above. And like I said, we didn't know that at the time, but coming back to on the ground, so what happened was they made the decision to both take off at the same time, noting that those MH-47s have got a few miniguns on each of them. For the listeners, that is a weapon that produces a formidable, it's a multi-barreled machine gun, and it produces a formidable amount of firepower.
It is utterly devastating.
Yeah, it's best to Google it.
Yeah, we'll go watch it on YouTube.
So they decided to take off together, and obviously all guns on all jets just absolutely lit up. We realised straight away we were in a fair bit of trouble, because we did take some small arms fire straight away. And once we realised, well, I already knew what was going on. Once others realised what was going on, we also had pushed out some of the small round glass. There were Perspex type material. Observation windows on the side, so we had operators on one knee up against the side, firing out of both sides. Both front gunners firing, both rear gunners firing. And like I said, we still took some small arms fire. I remember then hearing an explosion near us. We were up in the air now, obviously, however many, maybe a couple 100 feet under full power. And I just remember, thinking to myself when I heard that explosion and you saw the flash through your night vision goggles, that sort of started to concern me a bit, because I knew that was some sort of rocket, which I later found out to be an RPG. That basically airburst just near us. And then it was shortly after that, a rocket, another one was fired, and it airburst near the forward left of the jet, which disabled the jet, and you just started to hear failure of I honestly don't know how to describe it. It's like a screeching metallic noise. You know what it feels like when it's normally flying, and you just knew straight away it wasn't under control anymore. To the extent then shortly thereafter, I knew we were going to crash.
What went through your mind at that point?
When it became obvious that we'd lost control, we still had power and the disc was still going. You knew we had no control by the way the Chinook was moving, and there was a drop in altitude. There started to be a drop in altitude, which was not normal, and we knew they wouldn't be trying to land.
Well, what were you thinking and feeling as this was happening and you realised you're going down and not in a controlled way?
I took a knee and I grabbed onto a piece of strapping on the side of the Chinook, and I said a couple of... I don't really believe in God, but it was kind of funny. I said a couple of prayers, mainly to family, and then for some funny reason I pulled out a Spyderco rescue knife in a pocket near my calf. You know, we carried those knives specifically when you get tangled up inside anything to be able to cut yourself out. Yeah, and for some reason when I look back it was probably kind of silly, but I pulled that out and I had that in my hand ready to either cut my strop or cut anything if I survived the landing. Yeah, I just basically held on because I knew then, like, all this is happening really fast, that, we're about to crash, so you're just waiting to hit the ground. And, all these things are running through your mind. I was near the back. I thought, okay, that's good. Well, maybe. But, we're going to land and burst into flames. Will I be able to get out? I was looking around my goggles to see what others were doing and whether anyone was wounded or anything. And then miraculously, we had a very hard, very, very hard landing. But if you can imagine the Chinook flying through the air and it's sort of twisting from side to side and left to right, and seconds before we crashed, it just happened to be at that precise position that it would land at, as in it wasn't violently swinging to the left, right, or up or back. So it just swung back into that position. And that, probably saved our lives, and will certainly saved a lot of injuries or whatever. It's hard to speculate. But yeah, so there was that crashing into the ground, which sort of threw us, forward and into the deck. And then I just, remember however long it was, a split second, and I just remember saying to myself, well, you're alive now. Like, what are you going to do? Like, as in, get up, like, get moving. I've got a quick release on the strop. I remember pulling that and moving out the back of the jet. And then just before I was off the back ramp, I thought, hang on. And I sort of spun around to go back in because I thought, well, maybe there's guys in there that are, trapped or hurt or whatever and can't get out. So before I was out, I'd already turned to go back in to help or assist get anyone off. Miraculously, there was no significant injuries. Like I said, got everyone out. And we were then only on the ground and including the crew. And basically, as soon as we were out and sort of, I know it's hard to explain, you're a little bit in shock, but you need to keep moving, and it hasn't stopped yet. So we straight away put out security, and myself and another senior guy there more or less took charge.
All that deep, methodical, relentless training is overpowering the sensations of shock and the normal instinct to shut down and recover. Your training was kicking in, and that's what's saving you here.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was, like I said, it was instinctive. I'm not going to lie, there's a couple of pauses here and there. But you're just trying to collect yourself and get your situational awareness of the enormity of what's just happened. Only seconds ago, braced yourself mentally that, you're about to die. You've accepted that. And in that short term, I'd come to terms with that. So next minute I'm alive. And, you're now, okay, what are you going to do now? So, like I said, myself and another senior guy, I refer to as Charlie. Me and Charlie quickly took hold of, control and pushed some guys out, just, double checked everyone's okay and got some security out. And then moments later, we were under attack. That element that was firing on us had obviously, seen and noted where we'd crashed, which was their objective. So they were prepared and hoping for that and ready to get to that crash site. Yeah, we're then under different sporadic engagement from different areas. It just doesn't stop. It's not like, that occurs and you're like, okay, that's good. And, you knock off now. It just keeps going on and on and on. It's very close to first light now. So, that puts us at more of an even playing field with the enemy, as in we're a lot more of a superior force of a nighttime with our night vision devices and then thermal imagery and our training and everything else. So things were about to even up a little bit, and that was alarming. The second Chinook, against orders, which became a friction point in the debrief, but I can remember him standing up to the general in command of the task force who said he shouldn't have done what he did. He still had a Chinook full of troops, and he could have been shot down as well. But what he did, and what he stood at the debrief and said, I had guys on the ground. I wasn't Winchestered, which is the term used when you're out of ammunition, or bingoed is a term used for out of fuel. He said I was neither Winchester or bingo, so I wasn't going to leave him behind until the assets, as in some actual firepower, got there to help us. So he did circles around us, leaning over on either side with the miniguns, putting effective fire onto any enemy in the area and anyone moving towards us until he was out of ammunition and was close to out of fuel. And then he pulled off station, and then in a extremely rare, very, very rare occurrence, the gunship that was above us, which was due to go off station, because now it's coming up too light. So basically they have a rule or a policy that they don't fly in daytime. They're equipped with 20mm cannons, 105 cannons, more miniguns and various other things, and lots of surveillance devices so they can see and fire all those systems accurately. They stayed on station until they were fully expended of all ammunition and also low on fuel. And at that stage, most of the fighting had stopped because we'd put so much firepower down upon all the enemy elements. And then there was I remember being a bit of a quell in everything for however long that was. I don't think it was long, maybe half an hour, an hour. And what was happening in that time was they were working out, what to do first and foremost with us, as in how to get us out of there, noting it was now daytime and we're in the middle of nowhere, and anything that was in the area would be coming to that crash. And also what to do with the Chinook, because they're such a critical asset. And like I said, they're conservatively worth about 40 million, those ones in particular, I think. But however much they're worth a lot of money is the point. And the General made the decision, after recent instance, because it was only in 2005, so only the year before, that they'd had another serious incident, which the movie Lone Survivor is strongly based off. So they didn't want that similar incident, or the other instance when you go into a few more years before that of Chinooks getting shot down up in the Tora Bora, etc., with the same task force. So they're very cognizant of that, and he made the decision to disregard the Chinook and to get the men out. After a period of time, we got everyone together and moved several hundred metres to another location where we were told to go, where that Chinook was going to come in and pick us up. And then it was the same Chinook that had gone back, rearmed, refueled, and they came in. And just before they came in, 3 or 4 minutes before they came in, we started receiving heavy fire again. I've never, ever, ever seen before or since then, with all the flying I've done, which was a lot, a Chinook manoeuvre like this Chinook did. I remember him coming in so fast and so low, and then basically flaring and spinning that Chinook around like literally what appeared to be on a dime, and then it just dropped, not even 100 feet from us. And there was a lot of, what we call CAS, close air support, going off around us. Other assets, some you can't even see, that are engaging positions around us to get us out and to ensure that Chinook doesn't get shot down. In short, we all got ourselves on board there and it took off. I remember landing back at Kandahar, where a couple of key elements of the task force had moved up to meet us when we got off. And we got off and we counted the holes in that jet. There was 37 strikes of numerous weapon systems on the jet that pulled us out. And I remember coming off that back ramp. I can't describe the feeling. Trying to explain that feeling, stepping off that back ramp. Obviously, we're all sort of laughs and giggles then, and arm in arm, and doing some high fives and lots of fist pumps and good games on the arse, because it was quite remarkable that no one was killed, or we didn't lose a second Chinook. To step back a little bit, what happened as we extracted, they coordinated or synchronised the destruction of that Chinook. So it was bombed so that nothing could be taken from it or it couldn't be utilised. So as we took off, they put airstrikes or effected airstrikes onto that disabled jet as opposed to recovering it. That was a big decision by the General. To put a little bit of humour on it all, as I stepped off, I developed quite a good relationship with the Sergeant Major of the task force, a few cigars and some scotch on a few nights. And he was a real gentleman and a very, very experienced senior Tier 1 operator. I remember him standing there. A few of them flew up from Bagram to greet us because the event was that significant. And they had a dedicated C-17 there so we could just roll everyone and everything on it and get back down to Bagram to reset, because, in that task force, things just continue to go on at the rapid rate. But anyway, he came up to me, a big smile on his face, and he's like, "H, first helicopter crash?" And I was like, sort of didn't know whether to laugh or I was like, yeah,
Yeah, it was my first helicopter crash. He goes, damn, I've been in 3. And apparently I think he's one of the only guys to live across the command in the US, or maybe all of the US, I don't know, that's lived through 3 helicopter crashes, one in training, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan, I think. But whatever it was, so that was quite a moment. I said, yeah, that was my first, and I hope it's my last. As in, I don't I don't want to get it on a piston on trees competition as to who has the most helicopter crashes in their career. I'm sort of happy to live through one. One of the other, I think, just something else I'd like to mention or talk about briefly, one of the fundamental differences with, when you're looking death in the face, so to speak, and how it affects you is when we go out on a dangerous mission, I don't believe it's really at the forefront. It was never at the forefront of my mind, and I doubt it is at the forefront of many operators' minds. You just can't be thinking like that. You're mission-focused, and you're, like I said, it's about doing the mission, thinking of the specifics of that mission and the brothers to your left and right. And when someone gets shot, even though you might be in a firefight, shot and killed, you don't see it coming. There's no lead up to it. It's instant, or in the occasions it's instant. But what affected me was that thinking you're going to die and you're waiting to die and then you don't, as opposed to the instantaneous of it. So when we were, just before the actual crash, those moments leading into that, they left a mark on me.
Is that mark still affecting you today?
To be honest and about it all and inward, I'd have to say yes. I think that, along with many other incidents, leave a mark on you. It's how you deal with them. I've been through some what I've described as very, very average times.
It's a cocktail of trauma, and that stands out as a key ingredient, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. After I left the military for the first few years, I had little bouts of what you describe as being unwell, whether that's, depression or the way that you're acting. And I made some very poor choices as well. I'm man enough to admit very, very poor choices in my actions, with family and friends. The treatment of self. There's a thing called survivor's guilt. There's the whole, when you leave that brotherhood, your life becomes a bit vacant. And then also the transition into civilian life for people who have served, especially doing what we've done. And then when I've done it for so long, the easiest way I can describe it is so many components of normal day-to-day life are just absolutely boring. So you're chasing this fix that you used to have, and in the chase of it and for it, that's where a lot of guys can go down the wrong road, as I did.
H has so many more combat stories to tell from his subsequent deployments to the Middle East. We will get him back on the podcast in the future to tell them. In the meantime, we still have one more podcast with H for you to hear. Join us tomorrow for the final installment of H's story. Discharging from the commandos, reflecting on his time in uniform, and his life after the war. Here is a short clip from tomorrow's episode.
It was noted straight away by family that there's a significant change in me.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, please let us know. Jump onto Apple Podcasts or your app of choice and rate us 5 stars, and even leave a review. It helps us climb the charts, which gets these stories into the ears of more people. You can also post about it on your social media and tell your friends. Good old word of mouth. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design, music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Thanks for listening, and lest we forget,